Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salli wa sallam ala sayyid al-awwalin wal akhirin. Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, and upon his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. Alhamdulillah, today's session will be the last session in the first part of our study of Morocco and Spain and the Mediterranean region. And this is a history that has been shrouded in darkness. And we have been taking away the veils of misunderstanding and misinformation, and with the intention of going deeper into this and to give you openings. And now, because of social media and the access to library information, you can take certain names and you can follow them up. You can find references and you can actually study about them in a way that people in the past were not able to do unless they were university professors or master's or PhD students. This is a different situation. Information is there, but the problem is, or the challenge is, how to piece that information together in a more objective way. So how do we deconstruct history that was distorted, put it back together, and try to give ourselves a fresh understanding of what happened in the world? And this is so important in dealing with Islamic history, because of all the different histories in the world. This is one of the most distorted histories that we have today. We have been looking at North Africa, looking at Spain and Portugal, Iberian Peninsula, and we recognize an important group of people, and these are Amazigh. And the Amazigh people, who have been wrongly called the Berbers, although this name still does stick, and it has to be used sometimes because they even call themselves Berber. They're not barbarians, as the Romans had depicted them. But this was an advanced civilization that went back thousands of years in North Africa and even in the Sahara Desert region that was once a tropical rainforest. And we recognize that from the Amazigh people, there were important groups, because the Amazigh, you have the northern Amazigh along the coastline and in the Atlas Mountains region, and especially the people who were living along the coast. They were impacted by Greek civilization, by Roman civilization, by the Vandals, by the Phoenicians, by many people who were coming back and forth across the Mediterranean region. And so, in some cases, they're even blonde hair and blue eyes, although blonde hair and blue eyes is not an original color in Africa, because Africa is the source of humanity, and the first human beings we understand were dark complexioned people, because from darkness, if you take black, you can get all colors. You just mix other colors with it, and it will turn into everything. And so, from the people of the desert, there were certain tribes that had the ability to cross the Sahara. They could go from north on the coast, and they could take you across a sea of sand until you reach the Niger River, which is now like Senegal, Mali, this region in West Africa. And you'd be able to access the gold and the many different wonders that actually existed in that part of the world. And so the Amazigh people at first resisted Islam because they thought it was being forced upon them. And then with the skillful leadership of Musa bin Nusayr, rahimahullah, they recognized their upward mobility and they entered Islam in crowds. And the Sanhaja Amazigh people one of the most important groups, and they have the Judala and the Lamtuna and other subsections. They were probably the most skillful people to take you across the desert. And they had embraced Islam, but yet they had confusion. And after a period of time, corruption set in, and one of their great leaders, Sidi Yahya, went to Mecca, came back to Qayrawan, the capital of Islam, and was able to get from Sheikh Abu Imran al-Fassi, a great leader, to return with them to spread Islam. And that is Abdullah ibn Yasin. And Abdullah ibn Yasin, rahimahullah, is one of the great leaders that should be put next to Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Muhammad al-Fatih, many of the great leaders in Islamic history. This movement that was started by Ibn Yasin had a great impact on the history of Islam. And so he went into this region of the Sanhaja, and he began to call to the good and forbid evil. And he was coming from the Sus mountain regions in Morocco, what is now Morocco, and he went into the area of the Sanhaja. And this area is what we would call today Mauritania and Spanish Sahara. If you look at Morocco, there's a dispute going on. Is it Morocco? Is it Spanish Sahara? Whatever it is, before these names, this region here was the region of the Sanhaja and many of the Amazigh people. So Abdullah ibn Yasin went, spread Islam, but he was rejected. And he eventually had to go south. He didn't want to return home. He went south because he had heard that people were interested in Islam. And so he set up a ribat. And this is tents, a small tent settlement. Some reports say it was on an island in a river. And he set this up, and from 5 students, it turned into 20, it turned into 100, until now people were pouring into his camp. And he was teaching the people basically Islamic studies, Quran and Sunnah, but he was emphasizing calling to the good and forbidding evil. He was also emphasizing lifting unjust taxes. So the Murabitun were focusing on economic things. And that really, if you look at the course of history, many historians, especially secular ones, they believe that the bottom line in the changing of history is money. It's wealth. And once people start talking about wealth, then you will see a change in the society. So the Murabitun struggled with this. And after a period of time, Abdullah ibn Yasin was killed, he was martyred and made shaheed, rahimahullah. But he had chosen as a successor Abu Bakr ibn Umar. And Abu Bakr ibn Umar, as you can see from the depictions of him, was of the Amazigh, of dark skin, you would say a black man today. He was a dark skinned leader of impeccable qualities, tireless leader, and he established Marrakesh as the base of the Murabitun. And this is the famous city today. If you get a chance to go to this city, you'll still feel the flavor of the Murabitun. You can still see some of the places that they used to be. And it's an amazing experience, especially in the spring. So it's famous in the spring season, you know, when a lot of things happen in the city of Marrakesh. Abu Bakr then, hearing about the spread of Islam in the south, appointed Yusuf ibn Tashfin, rahimahullah, to be the emir of the Murabitun. And he went south, Abu Bakr went south, and he did dawah right across West Africa. Yusuf ibn Tashfin was a tireless leader. And he established solidly the name of Al-Murabitun. So these are the people of Ribat, the people who defend the borders of Islam, the people who stand for the right and forbid evil, the people who sacrifice themselves while others are asleep. So this is the concept of Al-Murabitun. And Yusuf ibn Tashfin ran into a number of strange incidents and things that were happening there in this western part of the desert. And after a few years, when Abu Bakr returned, he found that Ibn Tashfin had over 100,000 horsemen. And instead of struggling for power, he gave his emirate officially over to Yusuf ibn Tashfin. Across the Iberian Straits, there in Portugal and Spain, the Andalusian Muslims were losing authority. Again, it was the dunya, the life of this world. It was tribal division. It was racial division. So they were literally losing authority in this part of the world. And the forces were coming from the north. Alfonso the sixth was coming, and he declared himself the emperor of all Spain. Much of Portugal fell at that time, even the city of Toledo, which is right in the center of Spain. And it was the former capital of Spain. Extremely important city. If you get a chance to go to Spain, try to go to Toledo. There's a lot of history there, and it's a very important place. And you see that our cities are named after that. When you say Toledo, people think Toledo, Ohio, right? But Toledo, in the lands where the Spanish went to, it is one of the cities that they wanted to name their places after. So the Muslims called a council, Rabatat al-Alam al-Islami, like World Muslim League, the big gathering of the leaders, 22 emirs, because they were broken in divisions. And they struggled to get some solution. Finally, it came clear that they needed support from the Muslims in North Africa. This is Amazigh. So these are the great leaders of the Sanhaja who were controlling much of North Africa at that time. And Al-Mu'tamid Billah, who was the leading emir, his famous words were, I would rather be a...
If you're coming to pray, please leave your shoes in the racks outside. Leave your shoes in the racks outside. And also, if your shoes have stuff at the bottom, just be careful because it's messing up the lobby.
So we will be breaking for Salat shortly because the time has changed. And so with the time change, it's right in the middle of our class, but inshallah, we're going to take a short break, when the adhan goes. But the famous words, he said he'd rather be a camel driver than a swineherd. In other words, he would rather be underneath the Murabitun, who are desert people, Bedouins, than underneath the Trinitarians, who love to eat pork and who bow down to the cross. So Yusuf ibn Tashfin came across, defeated the Trinitarians. He returned because he didn't intend to stay. He was called again, 1088. He went back, defeated the Trinitarians. He returned. And he was called again. And he recognized this is too much. The Andalusians were living a life of luxury. They had 5-course meals. They had all types of entertainment. I mean, the word guitar comes from guitara. It's literally an Arabic word. That's how much, they involved in entertainment. And so that was the situation when Yusuf ibn Tashfin came. So we will be taking a break now and come back shortly, inshallah. We'll be coming right back to finish this amazing story that we are about to look at. Wabillahi tawfiq. Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam wa rasulullah wa ba'd. Now, as we continue on, we reached a very climactic point, and that is when the Murabitun had saved Al-Andalus for the third time. And then Yusuf said to his generals, watch the Andalusians. If they do not defend themselves, if they do not stand up against the Trinitarians, we have to take everything. And so they did. In 1090, that time, Yusuf ibn Tashfin and the Murabitun took over Al-Andalus. So this is a period change for us. It goes from the time of the different emirates, 22 in some estimations, there are other estimations as well, to the rule of Al-Murabitun. And we recognize that Al-Murabitun had controlled much of North Africa, as well as Al-Andalus, and it was a major empire, major dynasty. But what we have to recognize is that the rise and the fall. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. We see that, we know the rise, we see it. And we see what happened with Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah, Abdurrahman I. We see the rise. Whenever we can see this, go in Islamic history and you'll see it. When the leaders are faithful to the Sunnah, when they live humble lives, they're balanced, there's justice in the land, there's no racism and tribalism, and other aspects, then we see a rise. When this leaves, then we start to see divisions come in, hubb dunya, the love of the life of this world, argumentation and fighting, and then the breakup of Islam. And so this came about at this point, and we called it the cycle of rule of Ibn Khaldun. He didn't use that particular term, but we can look at his concept as a type of cycle, of the rise and the fall of Islam. But you could say civilization. You can apply this to other cultures as well to understand what goes on with rule. And Al-Murabitun, they established, they were living a very simple life. They used to eat oatmeal, dates, and milk every day. Sometimes, if they were fortunate, they might have a little meat. They lived a very simple life. When they got to Al-Andalus, there's 5-course meals, and it was a different situation altogether. But they maintained. And that's how it is in the first generation. You're still struggling, and you have that feeling. And Yusuf ibn Tashfin, a tireless leader, who was basically, in charge, not 100%, because he actually died at approximately 100 years old. Okay, so when he first went over, they say he was around 70 years old or so, and so he maintained himself in an amazing way. This is a picture of his, the place where he's buried in Marrakesh. And if you get a chance to visit, it is still there. And, they're recognizing him there in Morocco. So you can see this territory of the Murabitun. This is an estimate of what it is. Again, Africa is a huge place. It's much bigger than what it appears on the maps. And you can see that deep in the south, it says Oudagast and Gao. So these are in present-day Mauritania. And then in Mali, the state called Mali. Okay, so Oudagast was a major trading route, and Gao was one of the famous trade routes that were there, where the gold was first coming out. And the first Islamic civilizations, or the first presence of Islam after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, was from this area, especially a state called Takror. And they were the first, the Takror Muslims were the first ones to be making Hajj. Way back in the 10th century, 11th century, they were making pilgrimage. So the Murabitun were there. And then you see north, it says Marrakesh. and then it goes into Al-Andalus. So this huge swath of territory was controlled by Al-Murabitun. And so this is an amazing achievement. And they were basically under the Maliki jurisprudence, and they established. So his son took over. Again, this is some weakness now here because it's his son. So that is sort of like whenever you see that, there's a kingdom associated with it in a sense. But his son, Ali ibn Yusuf, took over. And Ali was described as a person who had good character, and he struggled, and he was doing his best, and he ruled for 36 years, over 36 years. Some say 36 and a half years. That's a long rule. And but it was a huge territory, and he was forced to divide the land up. They did not have mass communications like we have today. So therefore, just for information to get, say, from deep south down in Senegal and Mauritania, all the way to their capital in Marrakesh, took a long time, sometimes months. And then to get up into Al-Andalus, this is a long period of time. So he had to divide it up and give authority to different people, sometimes tribal leaders, movement leaders, people of influence. But the luxury was there. They started minting coins in their name. And this is one of the signs of a state, when you start to mint the coins. So they start minting coins. And again, he called himself Amir al-Muslimin. And that was a very important thing. He did not say Amir al-Mu'minin, because that would mean they're saying Khalifa. He said, no, he's an Amir. So the Murabitun used this title, but still luxury started to affect them. And so their children's children, this is a generation, now there's another generation coming that's grown up in the palace, so to speak. So they're no longer oatmeal, and dates. They're now used to their 5 courses. They want to start off with their fruit, and end with their sweets. Different concept than the desert Bedouin, where the only sweet thing he knows is maybe a little honey and some dates. So the decline is starting to come. And following Ali, comes the next lead. Now it's interesting because Ibn Khaldun, who's living sort of around this time, so you get some quotes, and because authority is now being given to many different factions and areas, Ibn Khaldun said Al-Andalus afforded the singular spectacle of as many kings as there were towns in it. So there are as many kings as there were towns. So you have Amir al-Mu'minin on every corner. Okay, so something is happening. And this is one of the weaknesses in the minds of human beings. And Muslims are human beings. This is something that I'm trying to understand. And when you're studying history, and then you see the impact of Islam on people in their lives, but still human beings. Now, where does Islam stop and human ego and greed, continue? Okay, what impacts people? We are humans. And I guess that's the reason why Salat, in a sense, purifies us. Because when you're making wudu, you're purifying yourself. Or when you're saying, Allah, guide me to the straight path. Right? When you pay zakat, you're purifying your wealth. Because there's something not clean there, because you got too much. Right? When you're fasting in Ramadan, you're purifying yourself. That's obvious. You're gaining taqwa. When you're making Hajj, right, it's a complete purification. And the person who makes Hajj Mabrur comes back like a newborn baby. So all of it's purification, because we as human beings, we are dirtying ourselves, making mistakes constantly. So you have to keep this in mind, when you see a long period of time and you have to study it in a few classes or a few books. It's hundreds of years, and people change. So Amir al-Mu'minin on every corner. After Ali ibn Yusuf, He died in 1143. His son, Tashfin ibn Ali, right? He took over, but he was not as strong as the ones before. Remember that generational thing. And he started to lose ground rapidly. And so it was with his two successors, Ibrahim ibn Tashfin and Ishaq ibn Ali. And this architecture that you see here in the background, it is Al-Murabitun architecture. Now, when you're in North Africa, especially Morocco, you'll still see in the background some Murabitun architecture. Unfortunately, because of what people do to each other, a lot of it is gone, and then time. But Al-Murabitun architecture tended to be more, it had some beautiful angles, but it was more simple because they were simple and straightforward in their practice of Islam. So it was not very ornamented, not a lot of colors and a lot of things, artistic, but straight to the point. That was the beauty of Al-Murabitun movement. Now, decline is coming in. And what is happening now with their decline, a new movement starts to develop. And this movement is another period change for North Africa and for Spain. And you can see the connection again, Spain and North Africa, you see it happening. And this movement began in the high Atlas Mountains. So when you go to Morocco, inshallah, and you a little bit south down, you'll see there's mountain chains. And then if you go, to the eastern side, there's mountains. Okay, you have desert, you have coast, but there's a Atlas mountain chain. And so these Berbers were the Berbers who lived in mountains. So there's a difference between a mountain person and a desert Bedouin. Because a desert Bedouin doesn't climb up and down. Everything's, flat. There's some valleys and whatnot, but they're not climbing mountains. They don't have cold winters. In the Atlas Mountains, sometimes there could be some snow. And they're dealing with agriculture and livestock. They're mountain people, very strong, but they're a different type of Berber or Amazigh, you could say. And the founder of this group, who was born in 1121, Ibn Tumart, and he is one of the strangest leaders, one of the most paradoxical leaders that I have found in the history of Islam. And I looked at a lot of leaders and a lot of different situations, but I have never seen so much paradox, things that don't make sense, tied up inside of one person. This is Ibn Tumart. And the strange thing is, most people, unless you're from Morocco or something, or unless you're a historian, they have never heard of this person before. But he had such a big impact. And he came from the Masmuda. And the Masmuda was one of the Berber Amazigh tribes of the high Atlas Mountains. And his name was Abu Abdullah Amghar. See, that's your Berber language. Amghar ibn Tumart. Tumart, that's also the Berber language. Okay? And so they say in the Berber language, Tumart means good luck or good fortune. So he is Ibn Tumart, Ibn, the one who has good fortune. That was his father. They say that was his father's nickname. And according to them, there's different reports. His father's name was actually Abdullah. And you'll also get some reports where it says he was Muhammad ibn Abdullah, right? Ibn Amghar, ibn Tumart. Okay, you get different things. And you're going to see why that's important, what the actual name was. He's known as Ibn Tumart. Okay? And he was a very strange person. Brilliant. He's the kind of person who is so intelligent that he's like odd, he's strange because he's so intelligent. He's like a person who's sitting in the room, with students who are, doing basic algebra, and he's thinking in terms of nuclear physics. Like this is how his mind was from a child. He was a child prodigy. And he studied in Cordoba. Remember the University of Cordoba that was established in the time of the Umayyads. So he studied there in the university. Also, Qarawiyin, you have your Moroccan university. And then he went east and he went to Baghdad. And he studied in Baghdad. He studied in Mecca. Now, he claims that he was a student of Imam al-Ghazali. And he definitely lived in the time period of Imam al-Ghazali. And as many of you may know, Imam al-Ghazali was the head of the Nizamiya Institute that was established during the Seljuk rule. Nizam al-Mulk, who was the famous minister of the Seljuk dynasty, he established the Nizamiya. And that was, you could say, the strongest university in the whole Muslim world. And Imam al-Ghazali became the leader of the Nizamiya. And so he was, in terms of the level of his knowledge, one of the most knowledgeable people in the whole of the Muslim world. Now, people tend to look at Imam al-Ghazali. There was a point in his life, where he learned so much. He could answer almost every question. Fiqh, aqidah, language. He was like getting bored with knowledge. And he felt that there was something missing. There's something missing. Spirituality. And he reached a point in his life where he had we would call it today like a mental breakdown. He had a nervous breakdown. And imagine the head of the Nizamiya, hundreds of students, and he came and he sat down and he couldn't talk. He just did not talk. And after a while, they came and they took him away. And they realized something's wrong with him. And finally, he said to his wife, I have to leave. And so he went searching for people of spirituality, tasawwuf, right? There were people who claimed that they had high spirituality. And he felt that he had all the knowledge, but his spirituality was missing. Because remember, Islam is made up of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. So there's 3 stage levels, right? And after your basic rules of Islam, there is your rules of faith, your arkan, principles of faith. And then there is ihsan, which is righteousness, that some people call tasawwuf. So that's like your spirituality. They're all supposed to be tied in together. Later on, people sort of divide things up into different sections. So you have some people who are just into their Islam, they're into their fiqh, whatever. You have some people into their iman, so they're into their aqidah. And you have some people who are into their ihsan, so they're Sufi. But they're all supposed to be together, right? They're not supposed to be separated. Imam al-Ghazali was looking for that. And he spent a period of time, he even went into a minaret in Jerusalem and spent like months in the minaret. Like he was doing the things like strange kind of things, punishing himself, leaving the dunya. And some people look at that part of his life and they judge him. But when you look at his whole life, when he found out that the Muslim world was in danger in terms of the different ideas that were coming in from the Fatimids, Shia, and other people, he left this life of asceticism. He returned to his area and he studied hadith until his death. So he ended up in hadith, and no doubt, even with this period of his life there, that's kind of gray, he was one of the greatest scholars in the history of Islam. His book in Usul al-Fiqh is the main book in Usul al-Fiqh up until today. That is your principles of jurisprudence. It's Ghazali's book. Okay? So Ibn Tumart claimed, it's very possible too, that he was Imam al-Ghazali's student. That's big, right? And then he left there and he became a really good debater. See, he had the gift of the gab, and he could debate, and he could really charismatic speaker. And he started questioning everything. He went to Mecca and he questioned all the scholars there. They couldn't handle him. So they made him leave the city. And he started to travel around. And because he had gone so high, he now developed his own philosophy. Because another point that's here I had placed, he also claimed to be a student of Ibn Hazm, or Ibn Hazm's student. Now, Ibn Hazm, rahimahullah, he is another famous scholar who lived in Al-Andalus, and he formed what is called the Zahiri school of thought, or they would say Zahiri, right? You have another, that it's like a school of thought that nobody knows about except people who are into scholarship. And the Zahiri school of thought dealt with everything on the surface. They don't want to hear about your opinion. They don't want to hear about your analysis. They want straight, what does the Quran say? What does the Hadith say? Nothing else. And they judge everything by the surface. It's called Zahiri. So if you're reading tafsir, sometimes you'll see that the Shafi'i said this, the Maliki said that, and the Zahiris, they said this. So they'll mention Ibn Hazm. Great scholar. He was recognized in the Muslim world. He has done amazing works. Okay, so Ibn Tumart is influenced by that. Ibn Hazm is from Al-Andalusia. So that's our area, right? Same area again. So Ibn Tumart now, he develops his own philosophy. Now, we need to try to understand this man. Most people don't. And we have been studying a number of different groupings. That we studied sects in Islam, the different groups in Islam, the different Shia, the Khawarij, the different, breakaway Bataniya group. We looked at some of this, and for those of you who did not, you can go into our website and you can actually download the course that is dealing with sects, S-E-C-T-S, in Islam, and you can actually see some, or you can look up Bataniya and some of the other ones. So Ibn Tumart's fiqh was basically Maliki started, and then he went to the Zahiri fiqh. Okay, so he's trying to combine it, and then he starts moving away from Maliki fiqh. He also combined with this what is called kalam. And kalam is a type of Islamic philosophy, if I could use that term. And it came about when the Muslim world was exposed to Greek philosophy, Roman philosophy, Indian philosophy. Different nations came into Baghdad in the time of Ma'mun. You got to go back to your 10th century. And then you'll see Bayt al-Hikmah, that is there. And you'll see that knowledge coming in different areas. And so a group called the Mu'tazila developed. And so these people were trying to use Greek philosophy to explain Islam. And they started saying some strange things. They started denying certain attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they went off. And so to deal with the Mu'tazila, one of their greatest leaders, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, he formed a type of kalam, a type of way to respond to the Mu'tazilas. And that's what they call Ash'ari's school of Aqidah. Okay? But some people say that he was so influenced by the Mu'tazila, he couldn't get it all out. So in the Ash'ari, there are extremes. The basis is Sunnah, Ahl Sunnah. But there are some extremes inside of it. There's also the Athari school of thought, which deals with straight Quran and Sunnah, which now they call themselves Salafi, right? But there's extreme in the Salafi, as we know. So every grouping has its extreme. What he was doing, because he's got a brilliant mind now, he's going to combine all this. So you have a Maliki base, you have the Zahiri fiqh, and then you have the kalam of the Ash'aris, and then he infused inside of it the imamate concept of the Shia. The concept that there were imams that were left. based on, Ali and Fatima's children. And we studied the Itna Ashariya, the 12 Imams. And then we looked at the breakaway. We looked at, what happened with the groups like the Fatimids, right? And, the different breakaways, coming out of the Shia. He also brought in this type of philosophy, concept of a Mahdi to come, the promised one, which has a base in Sunnah, but now he's dealing in a different kind of way. And his tendency was Khawarij. Now remember, the Khawarij were the people who went outside of Ali ibn Abi Talib when there was a difference between Ali and Muawiyah, and they went outside of everybody, and they are the extremists. So it's total extremism. So now he's mixing it all up together. This is a strange person. If you have to read his books, he's got books too. And if you got to read his books and his philosophy, it's, a strange combination, but he's a brilliant mind. Okay? And he starts confronting people. And he was serious too. So what he used to do with his students, when he went into any city, he would look around, and if he saw people selling wine, then him and his students, they'd break all the wine. If he saw them gambling, they'd break up the gambling place. Like, they were serious people, right? That some would call like militant Islamists, extremists today, right? So that this is how he confronted evil head on. Sometimes it's too much because you go to an extreme. I remember I was in Medina, and we had these some extremists within our ranks. This is back in the 70s, and there were students. We studied the Hadith, and the Prophet ﷺ, in some cases, he said, "Pray in your shoes." So it's permissible to make salat with your shoes on. And you'll see from the Hadith, as long as your shoes do not have najasa, something filthy on it, you could pray in your shoes. And that makes sense. I was traveling in the middle of Arabia once. We came to an old-time Bedouin masjid. There's no rugs. It was Dhuha Salat. And on the ground was pebbles. And it had a little bit of thatched rugs. And you got to walk. Now, if you're going to take your shoes off, it's like walking over hot coals. So our sandals were clean. We prayed with our shoes. That makes sense. You're in the snow here in Canada, and you're a good little Muslim, and you're going to take off your shoes, and it's a foot of snow. Pray with your shoes on. You're not doing anything wrong. Some Muslims think they have to take their shoes off. So these brothers, to show you this extremist thinking, they went to the front of the Prophet's mosque, and they walked on the front line of the Prophet's mosque with their shoes on. Now everybody's sitting there with their rugs, nice, right? This is the first line of the Masjid al-Nabawi. And they walk with their shoes. And Afghan people were there. And they saw them, and they took them and threw them out the mosque. And they landed on the ground. I remember seeing one of the brothers. And I said, "Brother, what are you doing?" He said, "Fi sabilillah." Like, we are doing this, fi sabilillah. We have a hadith. I said, "But brother, use your wisdom," right? See the lack of wisdom? But then I went to the Afghan people and some people, from Pathan people, and I said, "Okay, what's wrong with praying, with shoes on the rug?" Like, they said, "No, in our culture, if you walk outside, there's something filthy on your shoes. So if you walk on my rug with your shoes from the outside, you're insulting me." That made sense. That's why whenever you come in a masjid, you got to take your shoes off. It's cultural, but still we have to be aware of people's culture, right? These brothers lacked wisdom, but they had the hadith. See how extremism can come? This is the most extreme case of this type of thinking is Ibn Tumart. I have never seen anybody like this before from the Ahl Sunnah. What did he do? he started preaching and debating people. He went to Mecca and he debated them. They couldn't handle him, and they had to kick him out the city. He went to Cairo. They couldn't handle him, and they kicked him out the city. He went to Tunisia. They couldn't handle him, and they kicked him out the city. He went to Algeria, Bejaia. They kicked him out. And then he ended up in Morocco. Now he's getting close to where he's originally from, but he's in the city of Fez. And now imagine this. He comes to the city of Fez, and the Murabitun had a habit. The men in the Murabitun, they're desert people, the men cover their face. All of the men. So they called them mulathimun. So it was a way of the Murabitun that the men, you'll still see it in West Africa and the desert, that the Tuaregs and other people. The women didn't have to cover their face. Okay, that's different than other parts of the Muslim world. Okay, so now he comes in, Ibn Tumart, and the retinue of Amir al-Muslimin, Yusuf, Ali bin Yusuf, bin Tashfin, is coming along. And Ibn Tumart is coming with his people. So he starts confronting, the group and making fun of them. And they said, recognize the Amir. And he said, all I see is women. Because they got veils on, right? So he said, all I see is women. This is his low way of insulting. Okay? And so they grabbed him and took him, and he started debating with them. And they brought the ulama when they realized he was an alim. So they brought the ulama, and he was defeating the ulama in his extreme way. And then the ulama went aside and they said, this man is outside of Islam. And if he continues this, he needs to be imprisoned or executed. Like, that's how serious they were about what he was saying. But the Amir, he said, no, we're not going to do this. He's an extremist. He's insulted me. We're not going to do this. They gave him 14 lashes. So they lashed him and they kicked him out of the city. Right? Ibn Tumart then went to his people. Remember, his people now, you got to go south in the Atlas Mountains, the Masmuda. So he went to his people, and then he went into a cave. And he spent almost a year in a cave, meditating. Now, what came to him in that cave, Allah knows best. But when he came out, he said, I am al-Mahdi. I am the Mahdi. Now, we have studied this Mahdi concept. It has come, a number of people in history have claimed to be the Mahdi. And we know that the Mahdi, aside from the Shia concept of the 12th Imam hiding in a cave, the people of Sunnah believe that there is somebody whose name is Muhammad, his father's name is Abdullah. He has a high bridged forehead and a hawk nose, and he will come near the end of time when there is much oppression in the land. Okay, that's the Mahdi. Ibn Tumart said, I'm the Mahdi. And his people loved him. He was so brilliant, there was no scholar around who could even sit with him. All right? And so they accepted him, and he made a base of operations in a place called Tinmel in the Atlas Mountains. This is an actual picture of the fortress masjid of Ibn Tumart. So this is in Morocco now. It's still there up on the hill. It is like an impregnable fortress. And they established that as the base of his movement. And they started to call themselves Al-Muwahhidun. Al-Muwahhidun, the people of Tawheed. And they went out from the base. And he put together a council. He had a type of pyramid scheme. He's a brilliant man, right? He's got his organization. He had his council of 10 that was made up of his family. And there were also people who stayed with him when he was kicked out by the Emir and given lashes. There were certain people who stayed with him, who supported him. And these people made up the group of a council of 10. That's the inner council, loyalists. Then they were supported by a council of 50. So it's like a pyramid type of thing. And the 50 were tribal leaders, people of influence, rich people, military, scholars. Then they had scholars. So it goes down and you have different levels. Everybody is making a pledge to the emir. In this case, it was the Mahdi. So he had some strong charisma. Okay, that's his claim to fame. This is a big one, right? And one of the main leaders in the group was Abdul Mu'min Ali, or known as Abdul Mu'min al-Gumi. He was a Berber as well, but from the tribe called Zenata. So he was not Masmuda. But his tribe is more toward Algeria, whereas the Masmuda are in Morocco. You can see the two different countries. Okay, but he was the main supporter of Ibn Tumart. Okay, and Ibn Tumart and his people, they organized themselves. Murabitun were getting a little bit weak. Finally, the Murabitun organized themselves and they marched towards the Muwahidun, because the Muwahidun were attacking Murabitun places. Anything to do with the Murabitun, they attack it. Now, this is the part that bothers me, because you're supposed to be an Islamic scholar, and these other people, even if they're corrupt, they're Muslims, right? And they're the Murabitun. But somehow, if you really look at what he did, the extreme of what he did, when he claimed that he was the Mahdi, it was a declaration of war. Because the Murabitun represent Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Maliki school of thought. And the Malikis had gone through a lot of changes with the Shias. The Malikis fought against the Fatimids in Egypt and in Tunisia. So in Maliki school of thought, there's no room for Shia. That's why there's no Shias in West Africa. There's hardly any, very little Shias in Morocco, none of those areas. They don't play around with the Shia. So by saying you're the Mahdi, it's like a declaration of war. And then attacking. So they brought their army to get finished with him. And a major battle took place, Al-Buhaira, in 1330. And unfortunately, it was a major battle. And the Muwahidun were defeated by the Murabitun. And whatever was left of their army went back in the mountains. Because when they're in the mountains, the Murabitun can't touch them. Because Murabitun are like desert Bedouins, right? They don't climb rocks. So once they go in the mountains, they're safe. But shortly after that, Ibn Tumart passed away. Now, because of his claim to be the Mahdi, they didn't want to accept the people. So for 3 years, they didn't tell the people that he died. And the people would say, like, where is he? Because, I mean, we don't see him on Jumu'ah. They said, no, he's in Ghaiba. He's in occult state. You see, the Shias, the 12ers, they believe that the 12th Imam, he's actually in an occult state. That he went into this cave in Samarra, and he's in there now. And there's a lot of things happening in Iraq right now. In the city of Samarra, if you watch the news, they're kicking the Sunnis out. They're closing Sunni masjids, you know, because they think the Mahdi is coming soon to Samarra in Iraq. They believe he's in this Ghaiba state, this occult state. So they claimed he was occult as well. 3 years. Finally, Abdul Mu'min, he starts grouping people together. After 2 years, he starts getting people together. And then finally, he brings them out. And he defeats the Murabitun. This is Abdul Mu'min. He defeats the Murabitun and he takes Marrakesh, which is the capital of the Murabitun, right? He takes it in 1147. Now, if you look at that map there, you will see, I don't know if it's close enough, but you know, you can see close there where Marrakesh, just on the north of it, and then, you know, Agmat, and you go down, you'll see Tin Mel down there. And you see the high Atlas Mountains? So you can see the Atlas Mountains underneath Marrakesh. That's the mountains. Okay? And then you have anti-Atlas Mountains. And when you come down from the mountains, you're in desert. Okay? So Abdul Mu'min defeats the Murabitun. And he forms the dynasty of Al-Muwahhidun. But the dynasty is based on his family and the remnants of the Council of 10. Remember the Council of 10? So they can choose from the Council of 10 or their families, or his family, the council chose him as the leader. So he wasn't from Ibn Tumat's family. And so he declares that he is the leader of the Muwahhidun, right? And so they continue, and Murabitun are by that time corrupted. And so easily, with their new zeal, they take over Morocco, Algeria. They say by 1159, they actually were controlling all the way up to Egypt, which means they controlled like Tunisia, Libya, that whole North African region, right up until the borders of Egypt. And then they crossed over. The Andalusians, again, are weak-minded. Murabitun are falling apart now in Spain, too. So now what's happening? The Trinitarians, they're coming back. They're fighting back. Okay? And there was a famous person amongst the Trinitarians, he's called El Cid. El Cid. Now, there was a movie by Charlton Heston this a long time ago, but they made a movie called El Cid, right? And he's a famous European prince, and he was a mercenary. He worked for the Muslims and other people and whatnot, but he was supposedly the champion of the Europeans against the Muslims. But the name is from a Sayyid, because the Moroccans say, instead of Sayyid, meaning their leader, they say Sidi. So they say Sidi Muhammad, meaning Mr. or Sheikh, or they use this word Sidi, right? So then the Europeans said El Cid, El Sayyid. Okay? So he was fighting against the Murabitun and organizing with the Trinitarians. So they needed help, and they called Al-Muwahhidun. So Al-Muwahhidun came across, again, it's Amazigh, it's Africans, right? Coming across again. And they came across, and they defeated the Trinitarians, and they took over what was left of Al-Andalus in the hands of the Muslims by 1192. There's Muwahhidun. So the successors of the Muwahhidun, Abu Yaqub Yusuf, he became the emir of the city of Seville. Now remember your cities in Spain, right? So you got Seville that is there, right? Right on the bottom you have Granada, and then you go a little bit west up is Seville. And Seville's right on the river. When Christopher Columbus first came back from America with his gold, he landed in Seville. And Seville became the capital of Spain for a long time. It's only recently they moved to Madrid. But Seville was the capital because the Muwahhidun, they made Seville their capital. So they moved their capital from Marrakesh, which was the capital of Murabitun. They moved it to Seville. And this is an actual picture of Seville. And if you get a chance to go there, inshallah, you will still see the great palaces and castles of the Muwahhidun are still there. They say Almohades. So you see the name Almohades. That's what they say, Al-Muwahhidun, right? So when you read books about it, you won't see it spelled like this. Almohades. Just like Murabitun, Al-Muravid. Right? You'll see it spelled in the European way. Okay? So they are very important because most of your traces that above Granada, the Granada area lasted for 250 years. But above Granada, Seville and most of the other places, most of the traces that are left are from the Muwahhidun, because they did a lot of building, especially Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur. So Abu Yusuf al-Mansur was a great leader. These are not the extremes of Ibn Tumart. They're not claiming to be the Mahdi. And although they moved away from Maliki fiqh, they were Shafis. So they started following Shafi fiqh, and they allowed Maliki fiqh, right? And so they were not extreme like Tumart. And so the people accepted them as their leaders. And it was a golden age of building and scholarship. Ibn Rushd, the famous philosopher and faqih, Ibn Rushd, called Averroes. In Europe, he lived under the Muwahhidun. Ibn Ma'mun, the Jewish scholar known as Maimonides, they consider the greatest scholar in Jewish history. He lived under the Muwahhidun. And when things got difficult, Maimonides he traveled over to Egypt because he was a doctor too. So there was scholarship, there was trade. It was, a positive time. He defeated the Trinitarians, but it started to decline. Remember Ibn Khaldun's theory now. And now, third, fourth generation, right? That original mountain man spirit is there. They're not mountain men milking the goat, and then drinking the milk. They're having a 5-course meal with their mint tea. Different situation. That's what Spain will do to you, right? We used to say when people came to Canada before, because I'm originally from America, if Americans come here, other people we call Toronto the Big Easy. Because, everything is easy in Toronto, right? Whereas if you go across to Buffalo, you understand, or down to New York, and you're going to see it like another world, altogether in that region. So the point is that things start to decline. Things start to go down. And one of their leaders, his name is Abu Nasir. Sorry, but there's an S missing. Abu Nasir Muhammad. When the Trinitarians came with a large army, Abu Nasir brought an army of close to 600,000. That's what some people say. And he got defeated. It was a huge Christian force. The Muslims did not have that spirit, the original spirit. There was some tribalism against them, amongst themselves, treachery. And they lost the battle. And when they lost the battle, they say that most of the men all over the Muslim Spain, down into North Africa, like a lot of them died in the battle. So it took the steam out of the Muslims. Okay, and then that theory of Ibn Khaldun started coming in, and they started losing their cities. They lost Seville. They started losing their major cities, and it comes in again. The dunya, too much wealth, arguing and disputing with each other. And then comes destruction. And the Trinitarians take advantage of this. And so they came down on the Muslims. And the only place where the Muslims could flee to was the province of Granada. Now, if you go back to your maps, you will see Granada in the south. It's a province in Spain now. It has 3 sections: Al-Malqa, which is now called Malaga, Almeria, and Granada, city of Granada. And then there's a mountain chain around the top. So therefore, the Trinitarian forces could not get from the top. The only way they could come in is by the sea. And the Moroccan forces, the Muwahhidun, and later on the Banu Marin, they protected the water. So they could not take any huge armies. They didn't have a big navy at that time. So the Muslims were safe, and they had to stay in this area for 250 years. That was the home of the Muslims in Al-Andalus, was there. So Ibn Khaldun's theory then comes in. There was a rise, Murabitun, there was a fall. there was a rise, Muwahidun, and then there was a fall. So we've watched the rise and the fall like 3-4 major times, happening there. And this one was crucial. And this takes us to the next section of our study, which inshallah we will be looking at what happened to the Muslims, after in that last 250-year period. We want to look at what the Trinitarians did. We want to look at the Inquisition. We want to look at resistance to the Inquisition. We want to look at the Muslims who actually made it across to Morocco and even to Turkey. And we want to look at how the battle continued in America, because this battle continued in the Americas. And we're going to study that as well, inshallah, in the next section after the March break. We will continue on. But before that, we want to open up the floor for questions. Again, these are some of the books. If you haven't recorded any of them, these are some of your, books for further reading. But the floor is open for any questions that anybody may have concerning these final rise and fall of Islam in Al-Andalus. Floor is open. Mm-hmm.
So, when Tumart claimed to be the Mahdi and that caused like a war, was Mahdi like considered like a Shia concept back then? Because I know we pretty much believe it widely now.
The Mahdi was considered to be an Islamic concept because it's within the Sunnah, and there are a number of hadiths saying that the Mahdi, the Prophet ﷺ said, the Mahdi is from my family. His name, its description, it's there, but it's vague. But it describes him. Shiites took it and they tried to put it along with their concept of imamat. So that's different. It's imamat. And they connected it to Ali and Fatima and, the imamat like that. Whereas if you really look at imamat, Fatima and Ali had another son called Hassan. And Hassan has a lot of sayyids, a lot of sharifs came from Hassan's side, not just Hussein's side. So the Sunni concept is, yes. I mean, even till recently, and when the British were fighting in the Sudan, that's, late 19th century, there was a Mahdi, Muhammad Ahmed, in the Sudan. Very famous person called the Mahdi. He defeated the British, and he thought he was the Mahdi. But then he dropped dead of typhoid fever. We have other people who claim to be the Mahdi up until now. Now they even say there's somebody in Yemen who says he's the Mahdi. I haven't heard much about him, but he's made the claim that he's the Mahdi. So you have a lot of people who make this claim. Any questions from online?
I'm not sure if this is a question, but it says regarding decline, it's dunya in the name of progress, shaitan's deception.
It's the decline means dunya in the name of progress.
Yeah, it said regarding decline, it's dunya in the name of progress, shaitan's deception.
Yeah, I mean this happens many times where the people, I try to understand this. Even if you study the Ottomans, if you go back to the series of Ertugrul Bey, the Resurrection, and you see why, and it happens all over the place. Afghanistan, it happens parts of Africa. You'll see, why does one brother turn against the other one? And it comes down to many times ego. I want to be the leader. Pride. Power. The person wants power. And the shaitan will come to the mind of that person and justify it and say, you deserve to be the leader, not him. So this is a study, and the only way to defeat that, you got to go back to the Sunnah, and you got to really purify your heart if you're a leader. So there are ways to do it, but it's straight Sunnah to come out of this thing, and this is good example of that. Floor is open now.
So when the Almohads took over Morocco and Spain, did people really adopt their beliefs and their culture? Because it was extreme.
Yeah.
Or was it really just they kind of forced their way in and they kind of left, but everyone's culture and identity and practices remain the same as before?
Yeah. So that, from what I understand, they didn't force their concepts, on everybody. Ibn Tumart, he was the extremist. But Abdul Mu'min, he had more sense, more political leader. And then Abu Yusuf al-Mansur was a great leader. Everybody loved him. So Maliki is there, and Shafi is there. I mean, Shafi is Imam Malik's student. So really, when you get into it, there's not that much difference really between them. Okay? So they de-emphasized that, whereas that was their emphasis when they first fought the Murabitun. So that went down. Now, once the Muwahidun left and they got weak, Maliki fiqh became 100% again. Yeah, they went back to the Maliki fiqh because that was the way of the people of Andalus. Okay, so, but there's not that much difference in the sense that, it's all Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But if you go to Spain or Morocco, you got to be aware of Maliki fiqh. We take groups into Spain, we take groups into Morocco. And, it always happens. We're praying in the masjid. I try to warn the brothers and sisters, but when they make salat, they say, Assalamu alaikum, and they stop. Because there's only one taslim. They don't do the other side. Because even in the Shafi'i and Hanafi way, this one is your fard taslim, is on your right shoulder. The sunnah is on your left. Even in the other ones, they don't say that. But if you study the fiqh, that one is your fard. So what the Malikis do is they say Assalamu alaikum, and then if you want to, you can say Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu alaikum. You can give salams to the other people. But our brothers and sisters will go to Assalamu alaikum, and then they're like stuck. They say, Brother Abdullah, is my salat complete? Yes, your salat is complete because your fard taslim is on the right shoulder.
Can you shed more light on the difference between Amirul Mu'mineen and Amirul Muslimin? You said
Yes, when you say Amir al-Mu'mineen, that formally means you are the Khalifa. That's a term that was used for Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali. And then when the Umayyads came and when the Abbasids came, when they say Amir al-Mu'mineen. So it's like a title that goes along with the Khalifa. Whereas Amir al-Muslimin means you're the leader of the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you go on a journey and 3 people, one of you should be the Amir. So you can be the Amir, but does that mean that, I'm your Khalifa? It doesn't mean that, man. It's just I might make a decision when we need a decision. So it is, but it's a very important point when it comes to the political status of Muslims. When the Murabitun did this, it's a very important point because they're saying we're united with Baghdad. We're united with the rest of the Muslim world. Although we can fight you. He had 100,000 horses in the field. Yusuf ibn Tashfin. Nobody could defeat him. But he said, no, I want unity. And that's a very important way of thinking. Very important way of thinking. Now, any other general questions anybody has? Yeah, go ahead.
Last question.
Go ahead, no problem.
So tribalism is like a big concept from an Islamic, I guess, picky perspective.
Yeah.
What are the allowances and the boundaries that you have to draw when it comes to loving your tribe or your country or that? What's the balance you can make?
Tribalism is important as part of the identity. Because the Prophet ﷺ said if somebody wants to get married, you should look for 4 things. And one of the 4 things, along with beauty, and along with wealth, and along with deen, which is the most important, is nasab. That's your genealogy. So everybody should know their genealogy. It's your tribe. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that. And in the Battle of Hunain, that was a famous battle after the opening of Mecca, just after it. The tribes revolted in the south. And it was a surprise for the Muslims. There was a lot of weak new Muslims there. And the Hawazin came down on them. And they said, we killed Muhammad. And everybody was in confusion. So the Prophet ﷺ stood up and he said, Ana Nabi la kadab, Ana ibn Abdul Muttalib. He said, I am the Prophet, no lie. I am one of the sons of Abdul Muttalib. He named his tribe. So when he named his tribe, they said, that's him. So your tribe is your identity. And there's nothing wrong with your identity. You should have an identity. Okay? But when the tribe becomes more important than anything else, when your leadership is based on the tribe, when your marriage is based on your tribe, on our level, we have marriage. And they say, okay, you can have a girlfriend if you want, but you're going to marry your cousin when you reach 21. That's tribalism, right? It's supposed to be, we're all Muslims, right? Not a racial thing or who is the best according to your deen. But there's nothing wrong with tribe. Because really, in truth, and I've done a lot of counseling, if somebody from Afghanistan wants to marry, marry somebody from Malaysia, they have to think about this. Because the Afghan person is mountain, tough life. Malays has really nice life. Mango and 33 degrees all year round. Happy-go-lucky. Afghan's tough. Because if you're not tough, you're going to die. So it's a personality, right? Can these two personalities live together? Suitability, right? If there's enough deen, they can do it. But if there's not enough deen, they're going to go back in their tribal ways. So there is a place of tribalism, but it's not in the front of the religion. Religion is the most important. The other general questions anybody has? So inshallah, we'll come to a close of this particular semester. And I want to announce to the students, I didn't have the information right now, but we're actually planning, inshallah, to take a journey into Morocco and Spain. And that would be coming in either May or in June, after Ramadan is over. Maybe the first part of June, end of May, first part of June, where we'll actually travel to Morocco and go to Marrakesh and go to Fez. And then some will go over to Spain, to Cordoba and Granada. And we'll be studying on the way. And that's really brings things alive when you're in a journey, right? So we intend to do that. And I will make that announcement. You need to know my Facebook page, right? Which is Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick. Public figure. Okay, public figure. That's the Facebook page. Or you could catch me on Instagram, right? Abdullah Hakim Quick is on Instagram. And so we will announce this there and let people know. So keep, keep in touch, with this. Sabah Travels is one of the groups. It's a local group. We may be traveling. We'll see if there's enough interest, then we'll take people to Morocco and Spain. And that's going to be really good for some people because after the World Cup, they want to see, what Morocco is like anyway, right? Aside from history. Yeah, this is for sure. Like we're blocking off tickets now.
No, I'm saying is how long will you?
It'll be 2 weeks, 1 week in Morocco and 1 week in Spain. So some people will go to Morocco and then come home. Some people will go to Morocco and then go on to Spain. Some will just fly in for the Spain part. So you'll have a choice, where you will meet us, for the 2 different journeys. But it will be worthwhile, inshallah, especially if you're studying this history. You've got some of this influence, but there's nothing like going to the place and seeing the people and actually walking in the place, where they walked. So with this, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for any mistakes we have made. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal 'asr. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.